Hello and welcome to New Perspective አዲስቅኝት Media.
New Perspective አዲስቅኝት Media is a Toronto-based digital and broadcasting media outlet that focuses on immigration, literature and art, community and culture.
Racist and so shouldn't be allowed on TTC vehicles. They are on the streets too. Should we take the police off the streets as well? You know, come on, slow enough.
Thank you. Yes, one is, when our kids were younger and they walk to school, there's a crossing guard at every single intersection. Why can't we put somebody in a vest in a similar way on every single TTC, at the beginning of school and at the end of school, so that the kids know that there's a responsible adult?
I was born in this neighborhood, 5 generations living on that street. We got to be careful how we frame this conversation. I hear a lot of talk about homeless people are not dangerous, okay? It's random acts of violence. Let's not stereotype homeless people as the dangerous ones. We're going to see a homeless person when they run away? No, okay? Homelessness and violence do not necessarily go together. That's one point, and I think that was reiterated by that first speaker. Second point is Value Village and Dollarama. Just about every store has a security guard. They don't have half of the people coming through, their customers coming through their door as the TTC does on a daily basis. So somebody's managing that organization improperly. And where's the money going? I've worked in construction for the TTC. I've seen the waste. And many of you have relatives work in construction and worked for the TTC. Somebody's at management has to be brought under control. Because the way they're running it, if they don't have money to put a security guard on every platform and on every train, something's wrong. If Value Village and Dollarama can beat them at that, something's really wrong here. Thank you.
I have one question. Do you believe, everybody talks about housing. So I know there is a illness that we have to cure. But do you believe that density causes?
You can listen to our weekly live radio on iHeartRadio, subscribe to our YouTube channel and download our app. Please visit our website at www.adisperspective.com.
So I'm Arif Varani. I'm the Member of Parliament for Parkdale High Park, and I'm very fortunate to be joined by my analogues at the provincial and at the city council level. So Batila Karpoche to my immediate right, your MPP, and Gord Perks, your councillor for Ward 4. And I actually reached out to Batila and Gord just a few days after Gabriel Leroy lost his life on a very fateful night at the end of March of this year, and reached out to them about this very idea, about listening and about hearing from the community about what the community is going through in terms of violence and safety on the TTC. And Batila and Gord were of the exact same mindset as me, that we needed to host an event, we needed to be working collaboratively together because it's very, very important, and it's a pressing issue for all of us. So I'm delighted that we're all here. Gord has very helpfully brought together some of the representatives of the Toronto Community Crisis Service, and I think they're going to be offering us some guidelines, or somebody's going to be reading out some of the guidelines they offer. But before we do that, I just wanted to give a shout out to Bishop Morocco Thomas Merton, who agreed to host us here tonight in their newly renovated auditorium. It is important to have a venue to do this. It's also important to have the support of people at the school administration and Principal Valachi. And obviously Bishop Morocco School is located on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, Anishinaabe, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit. For all of us who are here from different parts of Toronto, Toronto is home today to many diverse First Nations, Métis, Inuit people, and we acknowledge that.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Batila Karpoche, your MPP, and I have been asked to share a statement that has been prepared by the Toronto Community Crisis Response Team. And this is basically guidelines so that when the time comes for all of us to share our thoughts, we're able to do it in a manner that creates community and works towards a solution.
Hi everyone, and thank you all so much for coming. Each of us is going to give just a little introductory set of remarks to help ground the conversation and get us started. I want to begin by saying that I am a lifelong TTC rider. I started riding the TTC when I was 5 years old, and I can remember a time when I was 5 or 6 or 7, getting on the subway by myself and going downtown to do whatever, buy comic books, go to a music store, or whatever. And that's been my lifelong experience. To this day, for a while I had a driver's license, but years ago I gave it up. I didn't need it. I take the TTC every day. I raised my 3 kids, taking them to school and the science center and the museum and daycare and all over the city on the TTC. This August I'm going to become a grandfather, and I hope that I can take, yeah, I know, right? And I hope I can take my grandson up to the front of a train and have him look down that tunnel the way I did when I was a kid. But right now, many of us are fearful. And we're fearful not just of spaces on the TTC, but in different spaces right across the city. Many of the systems and structures and ways that we live in Toronto don't feel the same anymore. It began, there's always been some element of social conflict in our city, but it's been getting worse, and it got much, much worse during the pandemic and since the pandemic. And there have been a number of high-profile incidents, including a couple here in our ward, that leave us all at a loss and feeling frightened and wanting a chance to understand what's going on, understand what we can do, understand how we can help each other. One of the things that I try to keep in mind in conversations like this is to remember that when we have a moment like this in our city, it's not because we have some bad people. It's because we have some bad systems. Some systems that are failing us. I'm on the Toronto Board of Health, and we recently had a group of doctors and frontline community health workers come to us about the crisis we're experiencing in our shelter system. Here's the state of affairs in the city of Toronto right now. We have been expanding our shelter system year after year after year. We currently have space for something approaching 9,000 individuals, and that's not enough. There are people who try to get into a shelter on a cold night and can't. I've heard a story of a guy who regularly goes down to 13 Division and tries to break into their parking garage, so he'll get picked up and taken into custody for the night so he doesn't freeze to death. Doctors come to us and say that people are showing up in the emergency room with tremendous illnesses or just to be warm. And often the best an emergency room doctor can do is to give that individual a Tim Hortons card and TTC fare. At the end of the day, we have staff from the TTC. We have TTC buses pulling into the garage with people sleeping on them because that is the only place where they can be warm and safe. Many, many things are not working. And what I hope for out of this discussion tonight is for all of us to share our best thinking and our ideas on how to make the TTC and the city safe for everyone. So with those words, I want to thank you for coming.
I do like to start by sharing what the TTC means to me. Of course, like Gord, I am a TTC rider, but when my family and I moved to Canada, and about 20 years ago, we landed in Parkdale, and my mom thought it was very important for me to get a monthly pass, because that's how I was going to discover the city. And I remember, as a young woman, feeling completely safe with my Metro Pass, armed with my Metro Pass, taking the Dufferin bus, the 29 Dufferin, hopping onto the Dufferin station and checking out where the next station would take me, where buses would take me, and really got to know and fall in love with Toronto through the TTC. And so When we look at violence on the TTC, and when we look at some of the more recent high-profile incidents, of course, it makes us all anxious. I know that when I take the TTC now, I can get a sense and I can feel that in some ways. But I think it's very, very important for all of us to look beyond that and look at the root causes. Because what we are seeing in terms of the violent incidents, that's the outcome. Something is causing that, right? So what are the root causes? I come from a background in public health, and we're always looking at the determinants, particularly the social determinants. And when it comes to the social determinants, here, there are a number of them, but I'm going to stress on two important ones. Housing. Housing is a fundamental determinant of health. It's a fundamental determinant in community safety. And right now, in the city of Toronto, and actually not just Toronto, municipalities across Ontario are experiencing a homelessness crisis. In fact, recently, Hamilton declared a state of emergency because of the homelessness crisis. And so did Ottawa, I believe, right before then. So the homelessness crisis is getting worse. And we need to tackle homelessness by providing housing. Shelter, as Gord mentioned, it's a temporary measure. It's not the solution. We need deeply affordable, supportive housing. And that connects me to the second point, mental health services. Supportive housing is the kind of housing where it's not just the actual living space for the person, but it comes together with the right kinds of support that the person needs, particularly the wraparound services around housing, around mental health, access to other social services. Mental health is severely underfunded, mental health services. The Canadian Mental Health Association of Toronto, I had a meeting with the executive director many months ago. And as part of our discussion in terms of what we need to push forward in the upcoming Ontario budget, he let me know, and I want to get the stats correct, so I'm going to look at my notes here. So we know the pandemic obviously affected mental well-being, but according to CMHA Toronto, adults waiting for intensive community-based supports increased by 135% from April to March 2022, April 21 to March 2022. Number of people who were assessed as being in urgent need of support. What does urgent need mean? That term has significance. It means at risk to themselves or others, an immediate risk of homelessness, or high risk of needing to attend an emergency department. That increased by 175%. Meantime, the wait time for those in need of the urgent support during the same time period, the wait time increased from 30 days to 90 days. Now remember, this is urgent care, and they're waiting up to 90 days for that urgent care. And this is the part that is really, really disturbing. In the last 11 years, Canadian Mental Health Association Toronto has only seen an increase of 3% to their base budget. 3% over 11 years. That doesn't even keep up with the inflation of just this year. So you can see that it was already insufficient in terms of the support before the pandemic. Combined with inflation, it was impossible to deliver existing service level, let alone try to meet the need and severity of the demand. And like in other parts of the healthcare sector, the mental health care sector is also experiencing a staffing crisis. The workers are burnt out, overworked. There are responding to increasingly severe cases on a very regular basis, and the wages, paid sick days, benefits like paid sick days, nothing, none of those have been kept, offered or kept up. So at the end of the day, it was very important that we push for an increase to the base funding. After a lot of advocacy and push, the original request from CMHA was an 8% increase for this year's budget. The government came through with 4%. Not nearly enough, of course, still, but it was better than nothing. And even saying that feels weird, but at the same time, I feel like right now, the bar is so low that, you know, a 4% feels like some progress. So the other support factors, like I mentioned, social supports, ODSP, OW, TTC operational funding. I mean, there's a lot of different factors, but it is so important that the two main ones, housing, particularly supportive housing, and mental health services. And when we start to fund and invest in these services, we are going to be able to address the root causes of the violence that we see, not just on transit, but everywhere else. So I hope that as part of our discussion, we can also talk about how do we take action to ensure that at every level of government, right amount of investments are being made in order to address this issue. Thanks. I'll pass it to Jordy.
Thanks very much, Bertilla. The TTC, and what does it mean to all of us? For a guy who's been in Toronto since 1974, it meant going to the X when I was a kid, listening to the Let's Go to the X song. It meant learning how to ride the subway on my own when I had my first sort of legitimate summer job when I was in grade 9. And I had a very long commute from near the Peanut Plaza in North York all the way to around Ossington and DuPont, so read a lot of books that summer. But what it means to me now is that I'm raising 2 little boys. It means going to things like a Raptors game. It means trying to reduce your carbon footprint. And it's a bit troubling, to say the least, that what's been happening the last little while has made people second guess things, including me, in terms of choosing modes of transport. What made me think about this event and convening all of us here to hear from all of you, is the connection, the deep connection to our riding. Last June, you may recall, a young Tibetan woman was doused with an accelerant and set on fire and killed on a TTC bus. Her sisters live in Parkville. You know that at High Park Station in December, 2 women were stabbed early December, and Jennifer passed away from those wounds. You're painfully aware about what happened to Gabriel a little less than a month ago at Keele Station. He's a kid just from around here, right? He went to Keele Street Public School. These connections, 3 out of 4 homicides that have taken place on the TTC just in the last 12 months, are directly connected to Parkdale High Park. But this is not just a Parkdale High Park issue, this is a Toronto issue, this is a societal issue. On that, I see this issue exactly the same way as Gordon Bertilla. I think what's important is that you know sort of what is happening, but also what we are doing. So in terms of what I've been doing in the last 3 to 4 weeks, in the anticipation of this event, is I've been speaking up about TTC violence in the House of Commons. That's important for you to know. I've been trying to reach out to municipal leadership. Obviously, we're in the throes of a municipal election that no one saw coming. So I've been reaching out to Deputy Mayor McElvey about what is going on and offering support as a federal ally to city initiatives. I've reached out to the police at 11 Division to understand what happened during that pilot project and to understand their perspective on what is transpiring right now. And the offer was offered up to the police to participate in tonight's event as sort of additional speakers, and they were not able to attend. I've been speaking with concerned constituents who've been reaching out to me who are, quite frankly, petrified for themselves or for their children. I've spoken with the administration of this very school, a woman named Principal Veloci, who I mentioned at the outset, who has told me about the number of, I think the approximation of the number of kids at Bishop Morocco who use the TTC, given that Dundas West Station is kitty corner from where we're sitting right now. She said, oh, it's about 100%. And she also said about 2 to 3 times a week, her and the caretakers go over to Dundas Station because they're there just to be a presence, to try and deter activity, which includes threats and violence and assaults of the student body, much like an assault was carried out with fatal consequences with respect to Gabriel. I've been trying to work with government colleagues in Ottawa and raising this issue and ensuring that they understand what's happening in Toronto. What's unfortunate is that it's not unique to Toronto, but I'm a Toronto MP and I'm going to go to bat for this community and for this city. That's my job. In terms of some of those interventions, I've been speaking with the Minister of Industry. Say, well, Rafe, what does Francois-Philippe Champagne have to do with the issue of TTC safety? Well, there's one minor issue where that minister does have a role to play. You're probably aware, if you follow the Toronto Star and you follow the coverage of all of this, is that we've actually got infrastructure on the TTC that allows for cell phone coverage. Right now, anyone can call 911, but you can actually use your cell phone in the underground loop, like that, right just in the downtown loop, but only if you're on Freedom Mobile. And why is that, you may ask? Well, Freedom Mobile decided to buy into infrastructure that was put in place by an Australian company. But the big three kind of sat it out for purely economic reasons. So me and many of my Toronto colleagues, there's about 24, 25 of us, reached out to Francois-Philippe and we said this needs to change. Yesterday, thankfully, he issued a letter to the head of the big 4 telcos, including one in Quebec, and said, this isn't going to work. You need to sort this out. You have 30 days to do it. The next step, if they don't do it after 30 days, is for the CRTC to step in. But in terms of sort of thinking creatively, he expressed to us that, interestingly, the Telecommunications Act empowers the minister to make regulations for different reasons. There's no provision under the Telecommunications Act to issue a regulation that relates to security. That's just not in there. So it is a bit weird, Susan. So it begs the question about what we can be doing at the federal level, the provincial level, the municipal level. But there's one that comes to mind right away. But I'll just end on this. I'm in a position of privilege. There's no doubt. I have a car. I can afford to take a taxi or an Uber, right? I can make my choices. Many people cannot make choices. They rely upon the TTC as their only mode of transportation if they're not walking or biking. I get that. I also get the fact that of the city that I live in and who are the most preponderant users of the TTC. It's people who are low income, people who are marginalized, people who are racialized, new arrivals, immigrants. I've spent my entire life, whether that's as a lawyer or as a parliamentarian, trying to defend and challenge injustice and defend and promote equity. To me, at the very least, this is about equity in creating a more just and fair city. And that to me is motivation enough to get going with this conversation, to get going with active solutions about how we make the TTC safer. So I'll just end it there and say I'm really, really, really happy that you're all here. I think Batul is now going to turn to some of the special guests that we had spoken about. We're going to offer a few insights, and then it's time for the open Q&A. Merci beaucoup.
You can listen to our weekly live radio on iHeartRadio, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and download our app. Please visit our website at www.thisperspective.com.
From TTC Riders, Ellen Peters. TTC Riders is a grassroots transit advocacy organization that gives TTC riders a voice. TTC Riders organizes transit users to take collective action for better transit. A little bit about Ellen. Ellen is a semi-retired elementary school teacher, longtime Ward 4 resident, and a volunteer with TTC Riders.
And I also ride the TTC. I sold my car when I moved to Toronto because there were streetcars and subways and buses everywhere, and why have a car? But what I'm here to talk about is safety, of course, on the TTC. Shorter wait times and many people around contribute to safety. And for that to happen, Toronto needs funding from all levels of government. TTC fares have increased, as you know, services decreased, we are paying more for less. There are further service reductions coming on May 7th. These include, but are not limited to, reduced service on Line 1. This is clearly unfair to the people who rely on TTC daily to go to work, to school, to medical appointments, job interviews, and all the other necessary daily life errands that people have. It's become increasingly difficult to get to a destination in a predictable amount of time. This means you risk being late, or you leave exceptionally early and then have time to kill if your vehicles actually operate on time. Aside from the stress this causes to TTC users, which is huge, there is the fact that underfunding a service opens it up to the possibility of being contracted out. We've seen that happen with our healthcare system. Some TTC services have already been contracted out. The Wheel-Trans call center has been contracted to TELUS. The cleaning of certain subway stations have also been contracted out. TTC is reducing the number of its employees through contracting out and automation. Lines 1, 3, and 4 are one-person train operations. Presto is replacing fare collectors. There'll be fewer staff. We feel that there will be fewer staff in stations on hand to assist and direct transit users. Yet, the TTC say that they are prioritizing our safety. Mr. Leary said, and I quote, "Safety is paramount to all we do, and I am committed to ensuring the TTC remains as safe as possible. Reducing the number of staff and improving safety are not compatible. TTC needs proper funding, and not just from its users. Public transit must be funded by public funds. All levels of government should be contributing. Public transit can be an economic driver, it can help Canada reach its climate goals, it can, and most importantly, should be safe. The municipal government should find new income sources. A commercial parking levy is a possibility. It's been used successfully in Montreal and Vancouver. A levy on malls and commercial landlords could raise up to $575 million, according to an estimate by city staff. The provincial and the federal government must also step up. Providing funding for the purchase of vehicles does not do much good if there isn't money to operate the vehicles. Cities are economic engines. Traffic slows productivity. Fund transit, get our cities moving. It will mean that there are more TTC riders, which will make transit safer. It will move us towards our climate goals. It will increase productivity. It will make our cities a place to discover and enjoy safely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan.
Safety, whether or not people believe it, safety absolutely is paramount to all that we do. It's the filter through which we put everything. Having said that, the issues that we're facing right now are incredibly complex, and I think that it's been spoken about complex social issues that require complex solutions. I know there's concern about additional police on the TTC, about how we've handled that. Our feeling and our belief is that we need to have a balanced approach to this. We're not all in on policing, we're not all in on social measures, but there is a balanced approach that needs to be taken. So that's really what we're doing. The only other thing I would say is that, we, like all of you, are concerned about what we see here. I take the TTC every day to and from work. I've been taking it since I was, I've lived in Toronto since I was 2, so I've been using it all that time myself. So I share all of your concerns. I see what you see, I hear what you hear, our entire department is working. And sorry, I should introduce my boss is here as well. Our Chief of Corporate Affairs, Natalie Kulmop. I'm with the Corporate Affairs Department. Some of you may know me from TV. I'm the Chief Spokesperson of the TTC. So anyway, as I was saying, we're all about a balanced approach. We're here to hear what you have to say, get your thoughts and ideas. They really matter to us. I know what people say about the TTC. We're not oblivious to it, but we really are concerned and committed to making the TTC better. If there are ideas and suggestions you have, please share them with us. Let our customer service team know at any opportunity. We'll open it to you guys, and if you have any questions,
So my name is Angela Robertson. I work at Parkdale Queen West Community Health Centre, and I'm really here to offer, I think, just some commentary about mental health services and what are some of the solutions that, as we have this conversation, that I think we should be emphasizing. So I think we have heard the issue of housing, and that housing certainly is one of the structural solutions that I think we need to kind of bring focus on in this conversation. The folks who are unsheltered, who are homeless, who are using the subway system as warming centers are there because they do not have housing. And they are also there because we have sheltering and drop-in center and warming center gap in that infrastructure. So we have a woefully inadequate access to what I would say is 24-hour drop-in services, which can be warming centers in the city, and as well spaces where we integrate what I call basic needs support. So as we all know, in this pandemic, many of restaurants have closed things like their public washrooms. Many have denied access to folks who are unsheltered because of some of their concerns around COVID precautions. So when we create warming centers, and we saw the deliberations that happened earlier around the city's reluctance to keep warming centers open and to open them earlier, is that we then saw people being pushed into the subway as a space to stay warm, and we heard that from Councillor Perks and others who have spoken. So I would say that one of the solution is emergency sites like warming centers and drop-in centers for folks to use, while we also keep the focus on affordable, supportive, long-term housing as the next solution. The other solution that I would say that we should consider is, and when I say warming centers, I'm not thinking just about in the downtown core. I'm thinking dispersed across the city, because one of the things that we have seen is the concentration of those kinds of services in a small geography in the downtown core, when we know that folks who are confronted by conditions of homelessness are not only in the downtown core, they are in and across all parts of the city. The other piece that I would also recommend that we think about is crisis response. So we have some pilots that the city has currently lifted up around non-policing crisis response. And one of the things why that becomes important from the work that I do is that the folks who we serve who are homeless, is that being homeless is not a crime. And therefore, bringing a criminal justice or a policing response to folks who are occupying spaces purely because they're homeless, I would suggest may not be the first place and the best place to start from a public, in terms of policy and a public health response to what really is a public health crisis. And that is not to say that if there is policing needed, that policing will not be engaged. So referencing the crisis response, the non-policing crisis response team, are teams that have been lifted up. I think there are 4 of them currently being piloted across the city. And I would suggest to you that one of the things that we need more of those kinds of supports. And because by having more of those kinds of supports, it means that if you call, it's not going to take an hour or 2 hours for that service to get to the site of need, because there is just so few, then it means that they can respond quite nimbly and timely to those calls that will come when we have wider access within the TTC system. And I would say that lastly, we are not the only city that is looking at this issue, that are confronted by this issue. All major cities, really, I think, within North America are confronted by and dealing with this issue. And because during the pandemic, what we saw is when folks were asked to stay home, those who couldn't stay home were afforded the ability to use the transit system that was not fully unoccupied, but there was more space. Now that that system is back in more full use, is that we have now shifted to say that those folks who we had encouraged to use the space then, we're saying you should be leaving the space, but the leaving the space to where has been the challenge. And I would also just end off by saying and this is just using a quote from, or a sentiment from a colleague, Lorraine Lamb, who works with unsheltered folks, where she talks about sleep deprivation, and we know sleep deprivation is a form of torture. Yes, we read about it, we hear about it, we listen to it in the news. And that there are things that happen physiologically to folks who experience sleep deprivation. And so I would ask, in your thinking, in your moments of frustration and exasperation and legitimate fear, that you also think about what are some of the conditions that the folks who we are talking about are experiencing, in the form of sleep deprivation being one, and the impact on mental health and the impact in exacerbating mental health and ill health conditions. So just, kind of throwing those pieces in the mix for our deliberations, but housing, 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 and more housing, and we're voting for a mayor and more housing. Thank you.
Marvin Alfred, President of the Amalgamated Transit Union Local 113, so TTC staff, but unfortunately he couldn't be here today, and he has sent a statement that I'm going to read now. Thank you for the invitation to speak, and my apologies for not being here. I represent the people who operate and maintain the TTC. Violence on the TTC has received a lot of attention because of a few high-profile incidents, but safety has long been a concern for our members. More than 70% of TTC workers report experiencing workplace violence, but only half reported it because they did not feel they would be supported. We have a plan to keep our members safe through 1, better training so workers can protect themselves, 2, better processes so they can feel safe reporting concerns, and 3, enhanced prevention to stop assaults from happening at all. The TTC is not equipped to deal with broader social issues. The focus so far has been on adding more police to the system, but policing can't solve this. You can't, for example, move people into homes or shelter beds that don't exist. We need a comprehensive plan to address poverty, exclusion, homelessness, and mental health in our city. So thank you for having me at this meeting. I wish I could be here because we need to work together with riders, with the broader public, and all levels of government to build safer and more caring communities.